change. Hello and welcome. Today I will share you the second episode, what changes Biden's win bring for Americans, focusing the repair of foreign relations, China, and climate change. Repairing foreign relations. President Biden is likely to be more focused on domestic issues than on foreign policy, at least at first. But dealing with China will be a key priority. More on that below. Washington's relations with Brussels will improve as the US and Europe work together on climate change, China, and Russia. Biden is in favor of increasing sanctions on Moscow, has championed the expansion of NATO as a buffer in the region, and promised to make Ukraine a US foreign policy priority. But expect colder relations with the UK over Brexit. Biden's historic ties to Latin America mean the region is likely to feature more prominently in his presidency than it did in Trump's. Expect a return to Obama-style engagement with Cuba and Venezuela, efforts to combat corruption and violence in Central America, and a return to a more traditional U.S. approach to immigration from the region. The US Middle East policy is unlikely to radically change, save for cooler ties with Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu and maybe a tougher line on Saudi Arabia and Turkey, says Ian Lesser, Vice President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, a nonpartisan think tank and grant-making group. But Washington's approach to Africa will change, believes Theodore Murphy, head of ECFR's Africa program. A Biden win may reframe US-Africa relations away from Africa as a venue for China/US competition, he recently wrote in a research brief. Biden would focus on restoring America's global leadership through alliances and multilateral institutions, notably seeking to rejoin the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Iran nuclear deal. But anyone expecting a return to pre-2016 American foreign policy may be disappointed, writes Kadri Layak, a senior policy fellow in ECFR's wider Europe program. The instinct of many policymakers will be to try to restore the pre-Trump unity of views. However, the world has changed since 2016. This means that any new push to arrive at a common strategy will need to accept that the former international order is no more. For starters, President Biden will continue to pressure European partners to increase their defense budgets and take more of a lead in NATO, as President Trump has done, albeit in more diplomatic ways. China high up on the list for Biden, as he considers a more aggressively competitive era of US-China ties will be to make use of Washington's allies. That would mark a major shift from Trump's dictum of America First, a strategy presented as prioritizing U.S. interests, but which critics say instead morphed into America alone. And an isolated U.S. is just what China wants, says Emily de la Bruyere, co-founder of strategy consultancy Horizon Advisory. Regardless of who's in power, she says, Beijing will encourage divisions within the U.S., and the U.S. splintering from its allies, and the U.S. to turn inwards as much as possible. If Biden is able to influence global institutions and international alliances to strategically pressure China on issues like trade, Taiwan, and human rights in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, Beijing may find itself with less room to maneuver than under Trump's unilateral actions and his transactional style of diplomacy. On Xinjiang, the Biden team has readily called China's repression of Uyghurs a genocide, whereas the Trump administration has yet to do so, and has refrained from imposing broader sanctions on Xinjiang. You are going to need the entire international community to coordinate for things to actually have an impact on China, says Samuel Chu, director of the Hong Kong Democracy Council, which lobbies Congress on Hong Kong-related issues. A Biden administration, he adds, would provide some much-needed international, multilateral clout. Climate change. Biden's presidency will represent an almost total reversal of the White House's recent approach to climate change. Biden has consistently framed climate change as not only real, but a central facet of how his administration will handle issues of the economy, foreign policy, national security, and social justice. Over the next 4 years, he is likely to give a big push to clean energy industries, dial down support for fossil fuels, set new mandates for emissions reductions, overhaul how FEMA and other agencies help Americans adapt to climate impacts, and try to reassert the U.S. as a credible, influential player in global climate diplomacy. That process will likely start with rejoining the Paris Agreement, which the U.S. officially departs this week, something Biden has promised to do on day one. The next forum for climate action will likely be in pandemic stimulus measures. Up to now, these have heavily favored fossil fuels, but under Biden would likely shift emphasis to support clean energy job creation and R&D, in support of Biden's $2.2 trillion plan to decarbonize the electricity sector by 2035. Biden also will reverse some if not all of Trump's executive orders relating to climate and energy, most of which deal with deregulation and opening new areas for drilling. He plans to replace them with a slate of new orders to restrict methane emissions, clean up the government's office buildings and vehicles, create a new climate justice office within the U.S. Justice Department, build charging stations for electric vehicles, require public companies to disclose climate risks in their financial statements, and end new lease sales for drilling on federal land. He also will likely direct the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to devise new regulation under the Clean Air Act to cap carbon emissions, set more aggressive standards for vehicle and airline emissions, and increase funding for disaster response, flood insurance, and protective infrastructure. Notably, he will not ban fracking. If anything, natural gas is likely to get a boost as Biden pushes to phase out coal and oil. Thank you. We'll be back with a new episode.